Buenos días, Nicolás. Buenos días, buenos días.
Pues ya, ¿cómo está?
¿Motivado, optimista? ¿Recargó baterías?
Relajado, relajado, relajado.
Abra su cámara que está cerrada.
¿Qué pasó? Relajado, 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 relajado.
¿Descansó el fin de semana?
Eh, no, sí, básicamente entré en un flow diferente.
Ah,
Me desconecté, Leonardo, me desconecté. Fui a un lugar sin señal y desde el viernes no supe de este planeta. Un cañón muy bonito, cerca de aquí de Guadalajara. Subiré fotos ahí en el grupo para que también vean el lado de nosotros pues también somos humanos, también a pesar de ser profesores también queremos las mismas condiciones de los humanos, ¿no?
qué bueno que esté en esa onda. Mientras tanto, los futuros de los bonos del tesoro siguen rompiendo el 5%, ¿no?
Volvimos a la realidad, volvimos a la pinche realidad.
Ay,
Volvió a la realidad y ay, ay, tan lindo que está diciendo. No, ayer dije, ¿y para qué vuelvo? Si aquí estoy, aquí en unas piscinas termales.
era feliz.
Espérame. ¿Ah?
Ah, pues sí, buenos días.
Sí, me recibe con estos futuros cayendo.
Los futuros de las acciones caen este lunes. Mande el mensaje, ¿no? Por favor.
Sí.
Mande el mensaje que los
Sí,
futuros de,
gracias.
los
Porque
futuros de las
también, para no estar solo en este Via Crucis,
mientras usted andaba en relajación, los futuros de las acciones caen este lunes. La medida en que los bonos del tesoro tocan o rompen el 5%, los bonos del tesoro a 10 años siguen rompiendo su máximo histórico de más de desde el 2007. Los futuros caen esta mañana después de que los bonos del tesoro aumentan a niveles no vistos desde hace décadas. Los futuros ligados al Dow Jones caen en consecuencia 121 puntos. Los futuros del Standard Poor's y el Nasdaq pierden 0.3% respectivamente. El benchmark a 10 años estuvo por encima del nivel del 5% y eso pues está rompiendo los máximos históricos. No se había visto desde julio de 2007 esa situación, julio del 2000, como desde la última versión del Señor de los Anillos, ¿no? Eh,
no, inclusive más, no, la última versión fue en el 2004,
bueno.
2004 o 2001, no sé, creo que es 2001, no sé, no estoy tan seguro, perdón. La última versión fue un poquito antes.
Pues fueron los comentarios de la Reserva Federal del señor Jerome Powell los que hace que, respecto a su política monetaria, los que hace que pareciera que los inversionistas tienen mayores preocupaciones para que las tasas sigan yendo al alza. 5% en los bonos al 10 años es un nivel clave para los inversionistas en Wall Street, puesto que es una señal fuerte de que los inversionistas están perdiendo fe en que la Fed pudiera mantener las tasas quietas en el futuro cercano y pone presión a las acciones como resultado. Algunos analistas piensan que el benchmark podría ir incluso más allá del 5% respecto de su movimiento en el corto plazo. Este rápido incremento en las tasas podría acelerar eh, la acelerar la debilidad del crecimiento económico, dijo el señor Tony Dyer de Canaccord Genuity Group, Chief Investment Officer en Canaccord. Eh, Wall Street también viene de una semana difícil, Standard Poor's sí, bastante difícil, realmente nos tiene apaleados.
Entonces, perdón, interrumpo. October,
¿Perdón?
October, ¿qué pasó con October?
October terminó siendo Downtober.
Bonito.
Downtober.
Sí,
Sí, pues el Standard Poor's terminó la semana 2 puntos por ciento abajo, apuntando a pérdidas durante la semana. El Dow Jones se dio 1.6%, mientras que el Nasdaq se enterró 3.2% a, a registrar su segunda semana de pérdidas en racha. La temporada de utilidades sigue y esta semana es cuando reportan los grandes titanes. Los inversionistas tendrán que ver los resultados de Alphabet, Amazon y Meta y Microsoft para ver información clave respecto del mercado accionario. Pues sí, se vienen las buenas, se vienen las chidas, ¿no? Los meros moles. Alphabet, Amazon, Meta y Microsoft. Y este mercado de ala caída con los bonos del tesoro tocando el 5%. Dígame, Jaime, ¿tiene alguna pregunta?
No, de hecho, justo, bueno, como la semana pasada estábamos diciendo que ya íbamos a intentar salirnos de Comcast, justo creo que el 26, el jueves, ellos reportan también ganancias. Entonces,
Ay, ¿será que nos vamos a aguantar esa posición, mi estimado Jaime?
pues no sé, yo creo que a lo mejor ya con eso nos podemos salir bien y esos movimientos raros que han pasado, entonces ya los compensamos.
A ver, ahorita checamos a la apertura qué onda. ¿Y qué pasó en el mundo?
Antes de esto, ¿qué pasa? Bueno, tenemos dos opciones. Lo que pasa es que tenemos la parte política, que es muy fuerte, y la programación. ¿Cuál de las dos quiere ver primero?
Arranquemos con el calendario. Arranquemos con el calendario de
Es la del
utilidades,
18.
que es la que más nos importa. O sea, la parte política está pesadita, pero es que esta semana definitivamente tenemos que arrancar con lo más fuerte y es, ay, se viene la
Pero
semana.
antes de, mire, antes de cualquier, porque sí es la semana más pesada en cuanto a cantidad, quiero que vean viernes, el que está resaltado en amarillo. Mira, lo que pasa es que tendré que quitar un poco nuestras caritas, su carita y mi carita.
¿Sucaritas? ¿No que Krusty
¿Sí?
Flake? ¿No que Krusty
No,
Flake?
no, yo desayuno su carita, usted creo que
Ah, sí, sí, sí. Inflación PC Estados Unidos.
viernes.
Uf, en la
Dato
mañana, ¿no?
sumamente revelador de si vamos para donde vamos, si la Fed hizo o sea, si todas las medidas de la Fed han tomado curso y si vamos a hacer un fake landing o un soft landing.
Fake landing. Ah.
Pero no, a esa inflación. Ahora sí, ya podemos ver las que
Pues esta semana está requete carga torada de cosas de reporte de utilidades. A ver, reporta el martes importantes
Coca-Cola, Visa,
Coca-Cola,
Raiteo,
Visa, Raiteon, Spotify, Nucor, ADM, bueno, 3M. A ver, entonces, el
General
martes
Motors,
importante, vamos a resaltar las importantes porque
Kimberly Clark.
no, es que reporta todo. A ver, el martes importantísimas estas tres, ¿no? El martes Microsoft, Google y Visa, qué bonito baile. Esa va a estar
Texas Instruments.
potente, ¿no?
¿Sabe una cosa que
Esas
es
tres van a estar
o sea, que
potentes.
reporta y que siempre o sea, va a decepcionar como siempre? Mira ese fantasmita,
Snapchat.
Snapchat, ese fantasmita siempre
Sí, pero
o sea,
fíjese lo que hicieron. Ya para poder, se ocultaron detrás de
de eso.
Microsoft y Google para que no los arrastre tanto el mercado y por lo menos van a esconderse ahí debajo de la tempestad que salga ahí. El miércoles Meta, ¿no? El miércoles
Sí,
Meta.
pero Holly Burton también reporta el martes.
Holly Burton. Y el jueves Merck. No, pero Mastercard es la que más me importa. Mastercard y Amazon. Amazon
Amazon.
e Intel, ¿no? Amazon e Intel reportan el jueves, ¿no? Pues esta semana viene con todo.
En Face.
En Face Energy reporta también el jueves. No, bueno, esta foto compártanla en el chat. La verdad es que este calendario sí es muy importante porque se viene todo, 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 todo. Está potente esta semana, ¿no? Esta semana está bien potente.
Hoy en la tarde, Cadence Bank también, que la
A la que más me
mensualidad.
importa son estas de Visa, Google, esta, Mastercard, el jueves, Meta e IBM.
Afenol y
No, a Fenol no sé usted por qué le importa a Fenol, pero
porque pues, sigo que también en las energéticas.
pero bueno,
Tera,
pero si se viene, esta semana viene recargadita de utilidades, viene peor que el melate, ¿no?
Tera que la traigo en el portafolio.
Ok. Entonces, claves del día, ¿qué va a pasar en Europa? ¿Qué pasó en Europa?
Bueno, claves del día. Europa fracasa en la cumbre de Egipto. Tan raro. Y demuestra la nueva influencia exterior y la importancia para frenar la guerra.
Pues es que en Medio Oriente Europa no tiene muchos fans.
Sí.
De
Desde que
pronto para
colocaron
la
la
Champions
democracia,
League es lo único, pero
desde que les incrustaron a los israelitas en medio de todo el.
sí,
No, no tiene
no hay mucha
muchos
animosidad
apoyos
respecto.
sociales.
Sí.
Estados Unidos frena el inicio de la invasión terrestre para salvar a los rehenes, pero no la detuvo.
Pues yo pensé que
Eh,
este fin de semana se iban ya a ir con todo, ¿no? Pero no, parece que...
no hicieron eso, también. Blinken, Estados Unidos respondería de manera decisiva si los grupos respaldados por Irán atacan las fuerzas de Estados Unidos.
O sea, el detonante de la guerra es que Irán le dé por atacar a Estados Unidos ahí en la frontera.
Sí.
Ajá.
Y Netanyahu, que es el primer ministro de Israel, pues amenaza a Hezbollah. Entrar en la guerra sería el error de su vida.
Pues sí, la verdad es que sí, no estaría padre, ¿no?
Sí. Los grandes gestores de fondos creen que Europa aún no le ha alcanzado el pico en las tasas de interés.
En las tasas de interés todavía, pues, es que la verdad, pues nosotros no somos el grandes gestor de fondos todavía, pero pero la verdad es que se siente que la tasa de interés todavía le queda un piquito al alza, ¿no?
Sí.
Sobre todo antes del cierre y sobre todo por el dato de inflación, lo que usted dice este viernes, lo que pueda pasar con el dato de inflación. A ver, entonces, pues de la guerra más bien estamos más tranquilos
Ahí
que
están los puntos de la guerra.
estamos más tranquilos que el fin de semana pasado, ¿no? A pesar de,
Pues es una tensa calma.
esa
O
sería
sea,
la mejor frase, ¿no?
es una tensa calma porque se sabe que Israel tiene unas ganas de entrar en la franja de Gaza, pero que cómo llegan, pero pues eso es lo único que ha logrado Estados Unidos y Europa, frenar las intenciones de no, es que yo no le digo invasión, como de entrar con toda la potencia de fuego,
Apropiación,
sí, con toda la potencia de fuego, casa por casa.
acceso no carnal violento.
Exactamente.
Quitémosle
Sí,
lo carnal y pongámosle acceso violento.
acceso violento y sin, o sea, casa por casa sin ningún tipo de miramientos ni nada. Entonces, el mundo en guerra, es que cuando esta guerra se va al Pacífico, la cosa se pone más
Sí,
tensa
ya más
todavía.
tensa aún ahí con lo de Taiwán y China.
Sí. Entonces, Pekín responde a Estados Unidos reforzando la fuerza de disuasión en Oriente Medio con 6 buques con 2 destructores adversario 52D. Estos buques son bastante de alta tecnología para frenar todo, o sea, tienen diferentes metodologías para frenar los misiles que puedan ir de Yemen, que pueden ir de Egipto, que puedan ir de cualquier tipo de lugar y son bastante avanzados. Y de hecho ya se pusieron a prueba con los misiles que se les lanzaron desde Yemen la semana pasada.
Estados Unidos ordena al
Un,
personal que
un
no se...
tanque, ¿qué?
Estados Unidos ordena al personal que no es de emergencia que deje la embajada de
No,
Bagdad en Irak.
sí, pero antes de eso, un tanque de Israel dispara y hiere por error 9 soldados egipcios cerca de la frontera con Gaza.
¿Y Egipto no reaccionó de forma aérea?
No, Tensa calma. No le gustó mucho. No fue muy de su agrado.
Ok, y el ministro de Exteriores de Rusia, Lavrov, visita hoy a Irán. Uy, eso no está muy agradable.
No.
Con la guerra de Israel y el conflicto de Armenia como temas clave. No, bueno, eso no está.
Es que también en Armenia también hay guerra de Armenia. Se nos olvida ese pequeño detalle que en Armenia también está un conflicto y también es un conflicto racial.
Bueno, 5 cosas que hay que saber antes de que el mercado abra esta mañana. Los futuros de las acciones caen después de que los bonos del tesoro toca 5%. Se viene una avalancha de reportes de utilidades. Los gigantes tecnológicos como Alphabet, Amazon y Meta están en el escritorio esta semana y parece que arranca la ayuda humanitaria para a la franja de Gaza. Bueno, esto lo leímos prácticamente al principio de la apertura, no lo voy a repetir. Y se viene el torrente de utilidades. También los inversionistas están pendientes del reporte de utilidades de General Motors y Ford respecto a los resultados que van también a ayudar a resolver algunas preguntas respecto de los efectos de la huelga de trabajadores que ha tomado más tiempo de lo esperado. Y el martes reporta General Motors, Coca-Cola antes de la apertura y Alphabet y Microsoft y Snapchat después de la apertura. El miércoles Boeing, IBM y Meta. IBM y Meta después del cierre y Boeing antes de la apertura. Y el jueves reporta Comcast, Jaimito, Comcast, Amazon, Intel y Ford. Pues sí, está potente. Esta semana de reporte de utilidades quisiera tener más liquidez para poder entrar, pero bueno. Llega la ayuda a la franja de Gaza, la primera ayuda humanitaria y los convoys de ayudas empieza a llegar a la franja de Gaza para aliviar los problemas que hay en el conflicto Israel-Hamas. Más apoyo, comida, agua y suplementos médicos esperan que lleguen este lunes. El presidente Biden habló al primer ministro de Israel, Benjamín Netanyahu, el domingo y dijo que habrá un flujo continuo de ayuda hacia Gaza. Israel intensifica los ataques aéreos en el área, ha intensificado los ataques aéreos en el área durante estos días y mantiene la posibilidad de hacer una invasión por tierra. Los líderes alrededor del globo están tratando de prevenir el conflicto, están tratando de prevenir que el conflicto se salga a una guerra fuera de las fronteras de Gaza. Pero bueno, Estados Unidos apoya y después manda el apoyo, la ayuda humanitaria, ¿no? Y se consolida la subida de los energéticos. Chevron dijo que va a comprar a la compañía GES por 53 billones de dólares. Uy, GES debería estar subiendo, ¿no? A través de este acuerdo, Chevron va a expandir el crecimiento en Guyana, en la producción, en el espacio, bueno, en el espacio marítimo de Guyana, donde su rival ExxonMobil había sido un jugador importante. La adquisición es el segundo acuerdo grande durante este mes. Exxon también había dicho que compraba Pioneer Natural Resources por alrededor de 60 millones. Pues GES, ¿se acuerdan que GES la traíamos en la mira y que nos gustaba tanto y la tuvimos en
siempre me gustaba de la
el sector energético? Pues, pues parece que a Chevron también le gustó y fue adquirida por Chevron. Akira, ¿cómo estás? Qué gusto verte.
¿Será que vieron mis análisis?
Sí, seguramente todo, sí, seguramente. Y sigue el escrutinio hacia Google, sigue la legislación por actos antimonopolios por parte de la Unión Europea. Bueno, no solo por la Unión Europea, sino también la Comisión de Comercio Justo de Japón está investigando la violación antitrust respecto de las búsquedas que se hacen en Google y de las apps en las plataformas. El movimiento, la movida de los legisladores de Japón, pues están enfocados a seguir los pasos de la Unión Europea y Estados Unidos. Un vocero de Google le dijo a CNBC que pues Android es una plataforma abierta que asegura que los usuarios tengan la posibilidad de escoger lo que más les interesa de sus búsquedas y que las búsquedas en internet pues se pueden hacer a través de las apps que ellos quieran descargar en el App Store. Pero bueno, los japoneses también van detrás de ley antimonopolio en Google, ¿no? Ok, son las 5 cosas que hay que saber esta mañana antes de la apertura. 7:26, Nicolás, 7:26.
7:26, entonces a esta hora saludamos a un muchachito que viene desde
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
el lado oscuro de la fuerza.
Stocks.
Mato, buenos días.
¿Cuáles son las acciones que
¿Qué
están?
rollo?
Qué rollo, mi estimado.
Acciones que
¿Cómo
más
estamos?
que están haciendo más movimiento esta mañana. Chevron, Apple, Walgreens Boots, Allianz y otras. Allianz no la aseguradora, sino Allianz no es la aseguradora. A ver, Chevron y GES
¿Sabes qué? Pues
la compañía Chevron, las acciones de Chevron caen más de 2% después de que anunciaran que está comprando a su rival más pequeño GES en un acuerdo por tal de 53 billones de dólares en $171 la acción. Apple, las acciones de Apple caen 1.5% después de que hay un reporte del Global Times y Foxconn en donde está diciendo que el gigante tecnológico, que uno de los proveedores del gigante tecnológico está enfrentando una investigación por evasión de impuestos en China. A Walgreens Boots Alliance, que es una sola compañía, la farmacéutica está aumentando 3% después de que JP Morgan mejorara la calificación y dijera que las acciones salieran de su estimación de neutral a compra. La compañía está también mejorando su perfil de flujo de caja. Salesforce también está perdiendo 2% después de que Piper Sandler disminuyera la calificación de la empresa respecto a los riesgos en la ejecución de sus fusiones y adquisiciones. Y el sector de healthcare está cayendo después de que Pfizer tuviera que comprar a Telabank Holdings. El precio de las acciones están cayendo 2%. La última, bueno, Octa cae más de 3% en el premercado, ¿sí? Después de que los inversionistas consideraran que la compañía está anunciando compras esta semana. Y Alcoa cae más de 3% después de que Banco of America disminuyera su calificación. 7.29 con 20 segundos, me quedan 20 segundos para la apertura. Pues bueno, sangre, drama, dolor, manifiesto. Se siente un vacío, se siente con los bonos de interés abriendo. Vámonos, ahí vámonos a la apertura a ver cómo está.
Celebrating its 133rd conference season.
30 abre esto, ¿no?
Reflections on this?
Well, look, I have to believe
No, pero bueno,
might
está la
say
apertura.
stronger, longer. As John pointed out, energy security could play a matter if anyone thinks this deal doesn't happen. 2% is all they have. I mean, it's hard to believe that that's a monopoly. So I think that this is a sign that these oil stocks are cheap, particularly after Sheffield selling to Exxon. Market, look, the market is so grim right now. Maybe you have to look at where raising numbers are, but you could raise numbers to them, and you heard what Hess's return was.
Okay. Sí,
But
vale la
I
pena.
come back and I look at prices, and I think only bright spot for the moment, this group.
We have taken
empecemos
out
por lo
the
más duro.
200-day,
Bongo.
took out at 42.16, Jim, the
Yeah.
October low, intraday low.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're seeing the
Bongo
Magnificent
está
Seven
cayendo
retreat.
alrededor
We're
de
seeing
340
so
mil
many
acción,
different companies,
alrededor del
frankly,
340.
Wilson Wright,
La
in terms
caída
of the forecast
se
being not
desplomó el
that
precio
great.
de la acción.
I know that if
El
you're
viernes y hoy,
some of the things that were said
la
on that
caída
Morgan
de
Stanley
Bongo
call,
ya
that
está
look, if you're going to get
alrededor de
5%, we're not going to tell you
3.40.
not to get 5%.
Con esta apertura,
So, I mean, right now we have to try
todavía
to
el
get
precio
settled
no está,
to where I think
la
the
opción
30
no
year
se
goes to
pone
6,
de money,
David.
y
And people have to
pareciera,
just
a ver si
realize
aguanta.
that this is what happens while
Si
you're
aguanta esta
galloping to
apertura.
that. And you're going to go down every day toward that gallop until we stop.
Every day? Really?
Every day that it moves.
Yeah.
Look, there'll be days
Sí, pues,
where
me quedan
it looks
25
like
días
it's
a la
going to be
apertura.
over, but it's not.
3.40.
Especially with the issuance.
Podría tener,
Especially
puedo
with the fact
tener
that
la
retail sales are
posibilidad acá
strong. Maybe we get a strong
de hacer un
employment
rollover.
number.
Pienso
I mean,
que
Jesus,
con Mongo
economy's not
valdría la
We're
pena.
coming off a very strong
Con este,
employment
lo que
number,
pasa es
which
que
right, gets to the
tengo
point you still
tanto
think soft landing, though?
liquidez,
Yes, absolutely, because
pero
this economy is too
con esta
powerful to
liquidez,
land
bueno,
hard.
tener
And I think those who are saying it's going to land hard don't realize that we've had rate increases like this. We just not have had the
estoy al
speed.
borde del peligro, lo
And the
sé.
speed is daunting.
Estoy al borde del peligro.
Look, I
Tal
keep
vez
going
tenga
over the
que
words of
cerrar
Jamie
alguna
Dimon
posición
about the
incómoda
world being
también, ¿no?
dangerous. Did a piece of speak
Tal vez
for
Harley
club
Davidson,
members.
Walmart,
And I come back and I say,
Comcast,
okay, listen to what they said. You actually could argue that the only part of the world being dangerous that's factored in
Harley
yet
Davidson,
is that
si
oil's
cierra
high.
esa posición,
And there
Harley
could be
Davidson
more
está
to it.
bastante
When we come in, I mean, do you not check the headlines every couple
Yeah, you
hours?
do, and I do hear a lot of
déjame
remarks
ver,
from market
porque esta es la que
participants
más me
saying
preocupa.
it seems as the market
Lo que
doesn't
más me
seem
está
to really
matando acá
react
con
as much to
Mongo
geopolitical
es esta
events as you
Doesn't
might
know how.
anticipate.
de
Perhaps
el
it doesn't
PUT.
know how.
Al PUT
It's
podría
often hard to
darle
judge
un
exactly
rollover.
what the reverberations are going to be from
Rollover,
war between
rollover,
Israel and Hamas, for example. But
53
if it goes
días
to the
sin
northern border, if it starts
1.200
to
de
spread,
crédito en el 340,
that
en el
would
340.
certainly not be a good thing.
No voy a pedir
No,
casi
but
I don't know how much of that is market reaction right now or not at all.
Again, I think it's just trying to figure it out.
Pues, comprar tiempo, ¿no?
You're Jay
Comprar
Gray speak
tiempo.
from,
Incluso
you
podría
know,
bajar
every day
mi
you're going to get an
strike hasta
NBC report
el
from there.
3.30 para sentir
And then you
un
try to
poco
figure
más
out what does that have to do with the, yes, indeed, the price earnings multiple versus
aquí lo que
tomorrow.
haría,
And you don't know. In the
con
meantime, the
esta
deals
posición,
are happening.
recibiría
And
$1,000
people are
de
yawning.
crédito.
It's a huge
Para,
deal. Pioneer was a
liberar algo
huge
ahí,
deal.
Power.
Yes. People were saying, you know, there's no more deals. Well, I mean,
Comprando
wrong.
Those
58
are two of the
días de
biggest deals,
crédito.
without a doubt. But I mean, you can take a look. What are they doing for those who like to see deals?
Liberar algo
Absolutely
Hess is not doing anything. It's
Right.
it's
Y es
down.
darle
I mean,
rollover
that's
hasta
the reason I'm
58
asking
días.
John.
Last year.
In part is there are people who are
El
disappointed
put,
with the price, as you might imagine.
Los calls,
True. And Pioneer,
Call
look,
spread
my
lo voy a
charitable
dejar
trust to
quieto.
own it. With the ad
Quiero que
distributions, we
venza
did really
antes
well.
tiempo,
But at the
pero,
same time, Carl, boy,
si me dan.
that 10 years of the piece of paper.
It's too delicious to resist.
David and I did was that on John Oliver we did the 10-year play? But I mean, there is just a moment where you're sitting and you're saying, you know what? New Jersey general obligation bonds, 3 and change versus this nuttiness?
Even
I get
over Google, Amazon, Meta.
But not me. I like the
el
nation
rollover,
states.
¿no?
I'm not calling them companies.
sí,
I'm the
eso me
nation
va a
states
liberar
because
algo
they
de
don't have to
power.
borrow. They're like
Y,
the Medici
comprar
states,
tiempo,
having
comprar
just returned
tiempo
from
en
Italy.
la
I want
venta
to
de
get one
put,
reference in.
para
Oh, David, what time
que
is it?
tenga la posibilidad de
that's
tener
very
más
nice.
espacio. También le estoy
That's
dando más espacio.
the official
3:30.
I want to
Eagles.
share it with the class.
Simón
Well, I'd
se
like
mueve
to.
un
I mean, my
poquitico
problem
al
is
alza.
this is the
Prefiero
only
comprar
good
esos
news.
53 días, ¿no? Prefiero comprar esos 53
Otherwise, I come in
días
and I just say, look, I was
para
watching
mover al
markets
alza, ¿no?
last week, obviously, and
Sí, lo mismo creo que
wow,
podría estar
the
haciendo
earnings,
con AMD.
not bad, but the reaction is so
AMD,
horrendous.
estoy al borde
I mean,
del
some of
100,
these,
estoy al
when you
borde
look at the
del 100,
reaction, you would think that they had
y
first-class misses.
estoy
It wasn't
25
true.
días. y con
The
esos
PE
25
multiples are
días,
shrinking so radically. We haven't even
tal vez
seen what happens
necesite
if this
comprar
oil
algo de
strike
tiempo,
doesn't
¿no?
end soon.
Voy a
You sound a lot like Mike Wilson now.
No,
Solo
I
el
want to be
put.
Costin.
Le voy a
You
hacer
do
un
sound a
rollover.
little.
I'm going Costin for Thanksgiving. I'm
sound a
not
little
going
somber.
I mean, for
Con
Halloween, I'm going
AMD
Costin.
You're going. Are you going as
But I'm going to
$100 de
serve
crédito.
Wilson for Thanksgiving.
Pienso colectar.
Because I'm gonna be right.
dar un break-even
It's
hasta
just going to take some
93.
time. We have to
177
get the
le voy a quitar
bonds
$5
where
de
they got to
crédito.
go. And
Pero,
not J-Powell. It's not J.
It kind of puts into context some of the sell-side calls this morning. I wonder what you think of the Piper downgrade of Salesforce.
Oh my God. Okay, so can we just talk about the hatred of enterprise software coming from them? They had a huge upside surprise. Stock goes to 228, 229. Benioff was the most bullish I've ever seen him. Then I follow up with a trip to Dreamforce. He's the most bullish I've ever seen him. He's starting to break into new verticals. They're doing so much with generative AI.
Esto es la muerte.
It's
TLT es la
hated.
muerte lenta con usted.
I mean, to me, that's just PE multiple. We're going to hear from ServiceNow soon.
Yep, this week.
I mean, ServiceNow, they only miss and invent a thermonuclear war. So I just think this is completely overdone. But I recognize a bad chart. Look at, oh my God, it's a Head and Shoulders. Procter did well, by the way. It's the only good quarter last week. Head and Shoulders. What are you looking at?
I'm looking at some texts.
You're not looking at it.
What do you mean I'm not looking at anything?
You're looking at Jalen Hurts. You got the
I'm
pick
just
six.
making sure I've got some information that I need to discuss
Yapo.
the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is another deal this morning. Engage Smart, Vista buying at $4 billion is the price tag, roughly
Okay.
$73 a share. It is all cash, so unlike Hessa stock, at least if you own Engage Smart this morning, enterprise software, relatively small, you're happy because the stock's up.
Entre el amor
At
y
least
el
you're
desamor,
somewhat
pero lo
happy.
cierto
There
es
you
que
go. Got a
creo
nice
que sí va a
12%
tener.
bump. You can see you haven't seen that price this year. I haven't gone back and taken a look, but I'm just looking through. I mean, obviously Vista has been active. I did notice, speaking of the financing markets, they're not financing this right away. They're going to wait. They'll probably, it's all equity. They're bringing in most likely, some co-invest. They're taking General Atlantic down, which owns 52% of this, to about 35%. And as I said, fully committed equity financing, not subject to a financing condition, because you may want to wait, if you can, in this market and see. Maybe things will get a little bit better for you.
How about the fact that a
This
PE
is not a
firm,
leveraged buyout at all right now.
how about a PE firm being able to cash out a little?
Yeah.
How nice is that? I was going to ask you about Blackstone
What about it?
and cash out.
Pero
quarter
tengo que
was-
liberar
The quarter,
Buying
there was a
Power porque
disappoint perhaps if
este
there weren't
embate
more
nos está
That's what I like.
cash outs, even though they did
arrasando,
pass
¿no?
$1 trillion level in assets under
AMD ya le hice
management.
el
But it was
rollover.
hated. This is another one where
And,
it
Blackstone
was
did not,
hated.
was
La voy a
not a
aguantar.
good
On es una
performer.
de
It
esas
was
que
down
puedes
almost
para
almost
AMD
5%
y Apple
that day
también la voy a
The
aguantar.
reaction,
Comcast
Carl, to those that
definitivamente
just
nos
did
tocaría tomar
okay
una
is so
decisión.
punitive. Again, I don't
Comcast
want
está
to
al
miss the fact that
43.
I got look. Has
Lo que
Wilson
me
been right
preocupa de
during the last
Comcast,
week? Yeah,
lo
dead
que me
right.
preocupa de Comcast
But
es
I also
que
think
se nos
that
salga
we're
de
going
un
to
rango
the
de tal
level of
forma
gloom is
que
very
no
high,
tengamos,
and a lot of it is in the context
salida.
of Jamie Dimon saying
Y como reporte de
maybe you
utilidades,
should be
el
more
reporte el
scared.
viernes, ¿no?
Rates going higher,
Yo creo que vamos a hacer
going
lo siguiente.
crazy, and then
Vamos a hacer lo
there's the
siguiente,
usual
Jaime.
conundrum of the
Yo
consumer. I wanted to
pienso
talk just for a
que
second
durante la
about Steve
semana lo
Square
vamos a aguantar.
and American Express.
Antes
If
voy a cerrar esto
the
antes de
student loan
que
problem is
reporte
so
utilidades.
bad, why is that the biggest spending
La
cohort?
pérdida máxima
And I
son
can't figure that out. It's a
50,
confusion,
$30,
but we end up just saying, well,
la
listen,
cierro,
maybe that's
la
an
voy a cerrar en
aberration.
el transcurso
They're
de
still
la
going
semana.
out to dinner like
Está en
mad.
2.37.
That stock has
en
acted
este
so
momento.
poorly, and yet
Entonces,
I
en
just
este
don't
momento,
think it deserves it.
Yeah, we talked a lot
Esto
about it
estaba
on Friday.
negociando en
Profit up
3.11.
34 year on year.
Yo
Travel
estoy en
entertainment up
2.37.
13. U.S.
Si cierro
consumer
esto a
9.
2.30,
No real credit
me doy por
worries,
bien
at
servido.
least
Voy a dejar
telegraphed to the
una orden.
moment.
No,
Para
I mean,
cerrar
yes,
esta
okay,
operación.
not on Express, but we do have auto loans. I'm going to talk to a lot of companies in
¿Perdón?
the auto business this week. Auto loan, excuse me, there are some problems.
Cualquier día, si
delinquencies.
esto llegara a cerrar
That's the first. But 30 years
2.30 antes de eso, con
worse
muchísimo gusto me daría.
delinquencies. That's not good.
Por
Really,
ahora,
I
la
didn't
pérdida
realize
son
it was high.
$75.
Even though,
que
as
se
you just
pueden
said, Amex
asumir.
was talking about great strength amongst their customer base.
El
I'm not
problema
seeing
es que
it.
si
Profligate
se
young
recorta y
people.
cae 10%,
Apparently, people who have enough money to
entonces un
continue
problema.
to spend.
It's kind of what,
Working home people
no
go
tengo la
out.
what
liquidez
Fifth
para
Third said
aguantar
last
esos
week was
problemas.
some degradation in overall credit,
Yes.
but a real bifurcation between the
Caesars.
high end and the low end.
Caesars es
And
otra
then some
que,
B2B caution regarding budgets going into next year.
Quizás
CapEx,
es
that
una
kind of
que
thing.
But we're stuck with
definitivamente creo que tengo
Walmart
que
and
defender. Voy
Costco
a
and
bajar
TJX
mi
doing
call
well,
aún más para ver si
and
puedo
everybody else
salir
doing poorly
antes 25
in the
días,
retail world. And that's a shocking development, because do we really only have, well, Amazon's doing well. Do we really only have a couple companies doing
voy a
well?
bajar mi posición
All of
hasta
retail?
que-
All of retail.
Right.
a ver si recibo algo de crédito. Puedo
And to
salir
Carl's point,
medianamente, ¿no?
you
De
hear
hecho,
that
creo
from
que
a
la voy a
number
vender
of
acá
different companies in
hasta
terms of the difference of willingness to spend amongst the middle to higher versus the lower,
Yes.
where there is a lot more pressure now. Let's call it, 40, 50,000 a year and below
que hasta ahí
in terms
voy
of
a
annual
poner el
income.
Caesar, me voy a poner acá.
I think even Musk talked about that on
Bajarle
the call.
alcohol.
You know, people who make $200,000
Voy a
a
bajar
year have no
alcohol, a
idea
ver.
what it's like right now trying to get by on 50.
Wasn't that a great comment by Musk? And not that he's the common man. I'm not making fun of him right here, but I am saying that of all the calls that I've heard since this quarter began, he seemed to be most sensitive to the idea of the tale of two cities. Pretty
I know.
interesting.
Yeah, the world's richest man.
52 de crédito, esto
Empathetic.
está. Listo.
That's not one of the characteristics
Caesars,
I would associate with him.
Caesar.
No. And in fact, I think you've
sí,
read the Isaacson
Caesar
book. I
tiene que
think that's
moverse un poquito por lo menos.
But no, yeah.
time for you to go. Goodbye.
No,
I know we
that's-
worked together for 20 years. Goodbye.
Yeah, Isaacson left out.
Bueno, eso me da
Steve Jobs
alrededor
wasn't
de
the nicest guy.
$618 de
No.
buying
By
power
the way,
y
not
aguanto
being a nice guy
y
and those kinds
aguantar
of things
todo
can be a very effective
embate.
way to
I mean,
actually
Ben
La
create
verdad es
Franklin was the
que
last nice guy. He
Mongo
told you
es la
that.
que
incredible
más
company. And
fe le
he's
tengo
done
que
that
va a salir
without a doubt.
positivo.
Although
Pero
Tesla
sí,
shares,
está ya
as
tocando
we
el
just saw,
340
continue
abajo y
Hang
con
in
esa
there.
caída
Not really.
tan
Not
horrorosa.
really. Since the
No.
quarter,
I
I
mean,
think
it's
is
Tengo que
down a
darle
lot.
tiempo
You
y
always resist,
esperarme a
though,
dar
getting
para dar
caught in the
espacio a la
gloom
caída.
and losing sight of opportunities.
Can't.
Today,
I can't.
upgrades of
Desplome
Walgreens,
estos
upgrades of
últimos 3
pins,
días.
You know what?
upgrades of waste management.
I'm so glad. Excuse me. I'm so glad you mentioned the Walgreens. That's Lisa Gill.
Sigue la muerte.
Now she's saying that Walgreens is going
Bastante
to get
horrendo
away
este
from
día,
this
¿no?
shoplifted,
Bastante.
closed the next tour, the greatest flagship store they had.
aguantar, ¿no, Nicolás?
I went and did a piece from, closed.
Si nos
She's
forzamos los
talking about
hombres en el
Wentworth
fuego. No es de-
really being a very smart.
no es de ponerse a llorar, toca poner la
They've
cara
got
al
to get
mercado,
that
¿no?
business. They got to get out of the shoplifting
Amat,
business
Amat,
and get in the money
Amat.
business.
Right.
That shoplifting per share has got to go away. It's very bad.
Mate, estoy
They
todavía
call it a clearable bar as this new management rolls in.
Well, when they give away the chocolate at the front of the store, at the one down here, because they know that
No,
quarter
pero
they can say,
todavía-
look here,
todavía estoy en 600.
an offering, that's
Sí,
got to go
aguanto.
away too.
Yep.
Aguanto
You should
todavía,
charge.
no, aguanto todavía vara.
I find charging to be
O sea,
an
ya creo que lo
incredibly
que tiene que
positive
ser
experience.
que
It's a very helpful way to actually make money.
Although was great piece of the Atlantic about, did you see that about self-checkout being a failure?
No.
Yeah, and then I said, well, maybe they don't use the self-checkout because it's such a pain. They just walk out.
Well, you can pretend to use a self-checkout. You can sort of do,
Have you ever done that?
and then just
By mistake?
I would never do that.
By mistake, Costco says there's a lot of people do it by mistake.
No puedo hacer
They
nada.
thought they
No puedo
paid.
hacer nada. Estoy
That's why they have to have
simplemente
people-
defensivo.
They didn't actually have the receipt.
No, right, but this is the problem with self-checkout. It turns to be a giant bust. But the CVS and Walgreens continue to do it. And who's got the worst pilferage? Well, maybe Target. But Target is...
Yeah, the Whole Foods around the corner here does self-checkout, but I always
Sí,
right
esta
by-
I
caída
paid for a bag and they
definitivamente,
didn't have
esta
it.
caída rompe
And
con
I
la
went and
tendencia
complained. They said, are you kidding me?
alcista
I know, we pay
de
$17
octubre.
I
for
walked
our
out with a
salads.
chicken.
Cambia
With
la
a chicken, walking around the street with a chicken.
crecimiento al cierre del año.
Oh, right, you can't get a bag. You don't want to get a bag.
I mean, hey, how you guys, how you doing? The guy said, hey, are you a Kramer? I said,
La
hey,
caída de la
chicken. Why are you carrying a chicken?
tendencia es una
If you're a Kramer, why are you carrying a
Everybody at
chicken?
Disney World carrying around a
de la
turkey leg.
ruptura
Disney. How about the break? How about the
desde-
India? And how about the
desde octubre del
ESPN
año pasado,
valuation?
un año.
Mr. Naysayer,
Y
Disney?
está marcando un mercado.
Yes, and the 8K from last week
What did you
certainly
make of that? I'm
was
sorry, you might have talked about that.
we did talk about a number of these things. Life goes on when you're not with us.
Not as good, obviously,
No, not with as much insight, not with as much
¿Dónde puede ser la
show
caída? O sea,
and fun,
¿dónde
but
puede
yes,
ser
we
la
did talk
caída?
about some.
But I was
There's
thinking...
long stretches of awkward silence.
Well,
You wouldn't want that.
absolutely, I know, and that's what it's like without me. But I did think that Iger is lifting his head.
retroceso de
starting to
Fibonacci.
put together something.
It's still coming. The whole
Work in
plan.
progress?
I think so. I think particularly on ESPN. I sort of have said many times the ABC idea that's non-core, sure, but will that really result in any kind of a transaction? Very difficult to say.
Oh,
See
geez,
what
look
the
at
points.
that. No, don't look at
Stock's not doing much for you, though.
He's going. I told you he's going to Boeing
Y
me.
entra otra vez en el
Disney.
canal.
Why did you buy it, Jim?
There's
What were you
headlines
seeing?
about Reliance in India. There's we got at least we got the actors talking again, starting
Yes.
again tomorrow after 2 weeks of nothing.
Yeah, they're back to the table. We'll see if they can finally get to the finish line there like the writers did.
I was going to mention Netflix, but once again, I would hear, Jim, where were you? So I'm going to skip Netflix. I'm not going to talk about it.
Nice. I like the idea that I'm always in your head.
You're
Which is
always
good.
in my head.
All right, guys, you know, we should take a look at shares of Apple. And speaking of newspaper stories, this is the Global Times.
It's paper of record.
Yeah, but it's out of China. And so
Muchas razones, la verdad. Bueno, aparte de lo de la guerra y
mainland
la
tax
relación
natural
de las tasas
resource
de interés.
authorities inspect
La tasa de
Foxconn
interés, la
companies in
verdad es
several
que
provinces.
cuando se tiene a Joe Biden,
Seems to be in part because the company's founder said in August that he would be running as a candidate in the 2024 elections of Taiwan's regional leader.
Independent candidate.
And Foxconn may be investigated because he is running for those elections. Chinese mainland experts again tell the Global Times the investigation is normal and legitimate as any company goes through tax inspections.
All right, okay.
But again, given everything we know in terms of Chinese regulatory authorities, what they do or don't do in response to U.S. or not, related to Taiwan, and so forth, you might imagine Apple would get at least some concern, and that's happening with the stock down over 1%.
I want you to go back 5 weeks ago when we heard that the government basically was saying, hey, don't buy Apple.
Right,
then
telling government employees don't bring an Apple phone to work.
What American was the best received in China this year?
Tim Cook.
And how are sales? Jam-packed.
Jim, I don't know how sales are. 'Cause we get
Reuters has a piece today that China's offering deep discounts on the
we get different data
maybe that's
points
why
or
there's
what
such a
seem
big
to be
line.
all the time. We don't know what's
Well,
right.
we left out the fact that they've been terrible at AI. How about that? And that's known sources within the company. You know, if you talk to someone within the company and you talk to and you're in the media, you're done. So whenever I read these known sources, and by the way, they don't like to do something until they're the best.
Yeah, Jim's referring to a piece on the tape today that
Pero bueno,
AI
voy a
within
aguantar.
Apple is seen
Simplemente
internally
voy a
as a
aguantar
disappointment,
mis posiciones alcistas.
that they
Por ahora no
were
le voy a
thrown
hacer
by
mucho
the wave
más.
of AI interest earlier in the year.
Well, I think that their history is when it's figured out and does more than just term papers, we'll be in there. I've been using it a lot. It's fun. I'm going to use it to do Wordle.
ChatGPT?
Yeah, I think it might be good for Wordle.
What's your
It's good for
go-to
games.
these days? Yeah,
It's good for games.
it's good for a lot more than that.
Well, I'm just saying that when it's worth it for Apple, Apple will do it. Now, people are going to say that when, in December 4th, when Lisa Su unveils her chips,
Yes.
people are going to say that the Microsoft Hewlett-Packard Axis is going to make it so that there's AI that fits in your daily life.
With Copilot or what?
Yes. And Copilot, nice piece. Microsoft's holding up better than
Es que no
most.
sé si se llama
Microsoft
Comcast.
companies. God, this market's ugly.
I was going to say, Jim, the KBW Bank Index is really flirting with taking out its May low.
I can't believe that those companies are doing worse. The stocks are doing worse than during the crisis. I don't think it's right. But then if you go back to the Bank of America, obviously not a small
Voy a
bank,
cerrar
people are worried
Comcast.
about their
Voy a cerrar
bond
Comcast,
portfolio, which I think is pretty ridiculous to hold the maturity. I mean, it's just too high.
To maturity, but they've got embedded losses that are enormous numbers. But right, to your point. But wait, worse than the global financial crisis? What are you talking about?
No, the bank crisis, not the global.
Oh, the bank crisis in March.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. No, I'm just saying that those stocks, a lot of those companies people were worried about, they were worried about the stocks. The businesses themselves aren't that bad, but the stocks are horrendous. We need mergers so badly, and that's awful.
Jim's right. We lost 4,200 here. Dow down almost 200. All sectors red except for industrials. Slight gain there. 1% declines on names or industries at least like financials, energy, utilities, and so forth. Quick reminder: you can get in on the CNBC Investing Club with Jim. Sign up and find out more at cnbc.com/join the club, or you can always use the QR code on your screen. It takes you right there. Fed is in a blackout window, mercifully, so no Fed speak this week as we approach the meeting next week. But of course, the news of the day is the 10-year visiting 5, currently just a shade below. Don't go anywhere.
fuera. Y Amat, no sé si saldría Amat. No sé si saldría Amat.
En Amat tiene el campo de acción.
Amat voy a esperar. No, voy a esperar a Amat, la verdad. Es que sí, quiero aguantar. Comcast es la que más me sentí incómodo. Amat, ON y AMD. Las voy a aguantar. Caesars es la que más me incomoda, pero esa tengo que salir. No puedo salir ahorita porque esa sí me va a matar. Esa sí me duele. Y Apple también. No, es que ya no tengo. O sea, la única donde podría tener después de esta embate horrible del mercado es Amat, para no mitigar tanta pérdida. Pero sí, este movimiento del SPY está fuerte.
Caesars no está tan mal porque se acerca el premio de Las Vegas y les va a ir bien a todos los casinos, vas a ver.
¿O te va a ir bien a ti en los casinos?
No, lo contrario, le va a ir bien a los casinos.
No, ese premio sí lo había escuchado, pero dame más información. No
pues es el más caro de todos ahorita, el Gran Premio de Las Vegas.
La Fórmula 1, ¿no?
Pero es que se unen todos los casinos, o sea, es la parte que no entendí. Se unen todos, hacen un bote, o tú entras o uno lo organiza y... O sea, es que esa parte no está clara para mí.
¿Para los boletos te refieres tú?
Sí.
Es que ahí te va. El boleto, si lo compras en individual, está carísimo, porque ¿qué es lo que hicieron los bancos? Compraron todos los boletos, los casinos, compraron todos los boletos casi, y ellos pues los dan en paquetes. O sea, de que la habitación, el boleto, las 3 noches. Entonces, pues, todos, obviamente toda la derrama le va a caer a los casinos.
O sea, no es que un casino hiciera y organizara a todos los demás, no. O sea, es organizado por los bancos.
No, por la Fórmula 1 como tal. O sea, pero okay. Los casinos, pues ahora sí es los que salieron más beneficiados.
Muy bien.
Entonces por ahí Caesars y MGM les va bien.
Ok, listo.
Ok, acá
listo.
TLT yo creo que va a bajar un poquito el call al 87. Sí, en TLT voy a bajar ahorita este call acá al 87 para recibir 92 de crédito y tomar algo de utilidad por la caída. Ay, no, es que TLT es tan horrible.
Watching the long end this morning, Bill Ackman got a lot of attention when he announced his bond short. Tweets a couple of moments ago, we covered our bond short. There is too much risk in the world to remain short bonds at current long-term rates. We'll see if that marks a turn in sentiment. Dow still down about 140. We'll get stopped trading with Jim in a minute.
Está muy difícil. TLT está muy difícil. TLT me va a tocar tradearlo casi que hasta el fin del año para no salir negativo. Sí, TLT es que son $800 de pérdida lo que se marca de TLT. Entonces, pero bueno, ya mi débito solo son. Ahí recolecté 46 de crédito.
Oiga, Tesla, 3% abajo, otra vez.
Tesla, bueno, gracias a Dios no estamos en Tesla.
Sí.
Sí, nuestras posiciones pues bastante agrias. Mongo la que más cae, 2.24. Con esa caída, pues bueno.
Y el peso mexicano, su peso mexicano 18.27.
Qué mañanita tan horrorosa.
Pues si quiere volvemos al retiro espiritual, ¿no?
Hoy no se pudiera jugar golf.
Hoy no se puede ir a jugar golf, no, definitivamente.
Hoy están cerrados,
Aparte que muchos están cerrados. Bueno, pues 900 de buying power y parece que el Standard Poor's dejó de caer, ¿no? Pareciera,
pero pues todavía quedan 7 horas de trading.
7 horas de no retiro espiritual.
Datos, 154.
Datos, pasamos a datos, los datos del Nico, ¿no? Pasemos a los datos del Nico, a ver qué está pasando con los datos del Nico. Sí, veamos datos a ver qué. Ya,
Arriba, la 2.
Habiendo hecho los, no, bueno, me cambió la cara del mercado por la cara del señor Olaf Scholz.
Bueno, muy bien. Y el señor dice que finalmente hay que deportar a gran escala.
Dice Olaf Scholz.
Dice, y que la nueva dureza de Olaf Scholz en la política de refugiados.
Pues, sí, lo peor es que...
D.com.
100 años después, 100 años
Let's get to Jim and start trading.
You know, my tagline for Mad Money is there's always a bull market somewhere. I don't like this bull market. It's military. Because I don't want to be like Cal used to be. But L3 Harris recommended this morning by Wells. And it's really good because they bought this Aerojet General. It turned out to be a wise acquisition. This stock is well off its high. It's got 2.5% yield. It's very well run. And they are the, I'd say maybe the big winner right now in what's going on. So if you did want to capitalize off of armaments, which I wish we didn't have to, LHX.
Spiegel.
That's generally the consensus when people talk about that.
And yet the stock is so, you know, we're talking about a stock 177. It wasn't 255. So I think there's a lot of room to run here.
So how are you going to frame up the week tonight?
Well, I'm going to have a snap one today. I'm very focused on this strike. They got to reach agreement this week.
The UAW.
Yeah, and I do think that Sean Fain is running the UAW. He is moving the goalposts. It's become very political. And I'm wondering whether the rank and file is still with him, because $500 a week's not that much. It is getting cold. This strike must be solved soon, and at prices that are not prohibitive, and it can't include batteries. Because if it includes batteries, then Musk has got such an edge that it's never, ever going to take off for Ford and GM. $4,000 would add to the battery. Try to make that up with the pennies.
Gets to the key question in terms of their ability to generate any kind of a margin, and given what their costs are going to be.
Must sound like a guy who makes cars.
Make cars. Lots of people to go to the office. Drive there.
Drive to the office.
Fabri, ¿cómo estás?
Get in a robo-taxi.
He's no Joby, I'll tell you that much.
Full self-driving is coming. I don't know if you heard. It's coming.
Still have to have someone in the... I know. And the Cybertruck, by the way. Not yet.
Pero ya lo puedes ir a Amazon.
We'll see you tonight, Jim. Mad Money, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, as we have now recovered 4,200. When we come back, Morton's Jeremy Siegel on how higher yields fit into his market perspective. Don't go away.
2% hoy con esa caída. Me tocó hacer rollover, me tocó hacer varias cosas, pero sí está dando.
Estamos más apretaditos que trasteo en el.
Ese chiste no lo entienden en México, Nicolás. Sería, a ver, se lo traduzco. Eso es que, ¿cómo es que se dice acá? ¿Trasteo?
No, es mudanza.
Sí, mudanza en bocho. Ese sí sería.
Sí.
Si no, no se lo...
Pero yo solo tengo una esperanza en estos earnings reports y son las megacaps.
Híjole. Me preocupa que... Me preocupa. No, lo peor es que sí, pero es que el problema, ¿sabes cuál es? El problema es que si le estamos rezando al santo equivocado, esto se va a desplomar con todo.
Pues
Oigan, ¿no hay como un ETF que rastree específicamente las megacaps, únicamente las 5?
Sí, de hecho hay uno.
Perdóname.
No las 5, pero sí las de gran capacidad.
Y ahora son las magníficas 7. Las 7 magníficas.
Yo eso, ¿cuál están sumando? Netflix y Nvidia, ¿no?
Y tu Nvidia.
Y Nvidia me trae como que me quiere hacer llorar del un mes para acá.
En serio, no me digas eso.
No, viejo, me trae. No. Ya ni quebranto amoroso, ya es quebranto económico.
Sí, ya llegó la notificación de divorcio con la separación de bienes.
Dale.
Sí, ya llegó toda la separación de... creo que sí hay un
¿No
blanco.
se queda con el perro? ¿Quién va a quedarse con el perro? Ese es el gran dilema en la separación.
A ver, busquemos Megacap.
Estoy que lloro.
Creo que hay unas... creo que sí hay opciones mega tendencia.
Podemos decir que hay VAR que se lo advertí.
Sí,
Estimado Akira.
No, la verdad es que las restricciones de la exportación a China le pegó durísimo a todas las semiconductores y en general a todo el índice, ¿no? Sí hay varias, o sea, hay varios ETFs que tienen exclusivamente las megacaps, pero siendo honesto, pues para qué si tienes al tecnológico, ¿no? Pero sí. En el análisis de sector estamos a ver, voy a simplemente ver acá como...
Good Monday morning. Welcome to another hour of Squawk on the Street. I'm Sarah Eisen with Carl Quintanilla and David Faber, live for you as always from Post 9 of the New York Stock Exchange. Take a look at stocks here early Monday morning after a big down week on Wall Street last week. We're lower, but again, off the lows of the morning, and there are pockets of strength there. You can see on the right, industrials, healthcare, communication services, all green. Everybody else is red. Energy is at the bottom of the list today. That's a bit of a reversal after the big deal we'll talk about. Consumer discretionary also underperforming ahead of some big tech earnings this week. Number of sectors on the move, as you can see, and Treasuries got included at the top of the list. It's been driving the action. The 10-year yield above 5% earlier in the session. It's now below 5%, but as you can see, elevated across the curve. We're 30 minutes here into the trading session. Here are three big movers we're watching. Chevron, one of the worst performing stocks on the Dow and the S&P this morning after announcing that $53 billion stock deal to buy Hess.
Alemania no
existe. Speaking with us last hour, more on what the deal means for M&A in the energy space from here. Another day in the red for Tesla after a new filing revealed the company's capital expenditures for the year would exceed its original $7 to $9 billion target. Shares are down 20% in the last 3 months. They got hammered last week on the back of that earnings report and conference call. And then Walgreens, one of the top gainers of the morning, JP Morgan upgrades the name to buy. As they say, quote, new era has begun at the company under the new management. Price target, $30 a share there. Stocks up 2.25%. Guys, this is going to be a really important week. And it's earnings. We've got tech earnings. We've got a calendar just to show you how much is at stake this week. Even though it's quiet period for the Federal Reserve, there's the earnings picture. And it's going to be dominated by consumer names like Coca-Cola. We'll get some economic bellwethers like 3M, if it is that anymore. And then, of course, the big tech setting the tone, Alphabet and Microsoft coming out tomorrow. As far as economic data, two key reports that I would highlight toward the end of the week. We get the first look at the third quarter GDP, which should be very strong. I mean, Wall Street estimates are between 4 and 5% growth that we could see for the third quarter. And then on Friday, we get the PCE deflator, which is the Fed's preferred metric on inflation. A few other releases in there. New home sales should be interesting with mortgage rates above 8%. And then that Fed speak, they're not going to talk about policy, Powell and Barr, because they're in a quiet period ahead of the meeting next week. But it almost doesn't matter because any of this stuff right now, because it's all about Treasury yields. And that 5% yield on the 10-year, we're wondering, is that going to cause people to come in and buy? Bill Ackman, I think, just covered his
Yes, Carl mentioned that Ackman said the economy is slowing faster than recent data suggests. We bring it up as Bill likes to introduce himself into the conversation, but there was a lot of focus, as you know, on him on that position, which has been a good one for him, being short, and now they are covering, obviously. They believe perhaps that there's going to be more money flowing into or demand for those bonds.
It does feel like a more dangerous world, no matter what happens here. And the fact that treasuries haven't been acting as safe havens is interesting, especially in light of the march up in gold. Maybe things will get a little too tense where you just have to go in and buy treasuries. But there are two factors that I wanted to hit as to why these yields continue to move up that we don't talk about as much as the solid growth and higher inflation and higher for longer. What happened in Japan, that's what kicked off the rate move overnight, which is there was a report out of the Nikkei Business News that Japan, at its Bank of Japan meeting next week, is looking at sort of scrapping the yield curve control further because they are facing upward pressure on rates as well, the 10-year nearing 1%. And so if they make adjustments, remember it's a global move. And there's the dollar-yen, it's around 150. Again, there's talk of potential intervention. They intervened last time because the yen is just getting so weak. So my point is there are other factors at work here, and it's a global move. And sometimes that's what the trigger is for a move that we see in our bond market.
Macro thoughts that we're going to get from some of these big companies? I mean, Sarah, you mentioned earnings, and it's nice that earnings is going to take the forefront, perhaps over endless chatter from Fed officials. But what, I don't know, are there any in particular that are going to stand out to you?
What stands out to me is that the earnings are good, but the guidance is less good, and the commentary from CEOs is more cautious than the economic data we're getting on strong jobs and strong retail sales. Brian Moynihan of Bank of America last week said retail sales are noise. The consumer's slowing down because the Fed's doing its job and it's working. So CEOs have a pretty good real-time indication of what's happening with the economy. If we continue to get this cautious chatter and cautious guidance, that could give us clues into where we're going. And that's been the big surprise, is how resilient the consumer demand picture has been. Carl, the New York Fed does a recession odds sort of model. Just another regional Fed model, and they base it on the difference of the 3-month and the 10-year yield. And it's come down a little bit. We're in the 50s or so percent chance of recession. It did get as high as more than 70% chance of recession. That's thanks to the stronger growth and obviously the backup in yields. But
motor del crecimiento global.
People have been positioning away from this at a time where CEOs are growing more cautious. So I think that is going to be a setup for how to think about this week a little bit.
Yeah, kind of rhymes with the journal survey last week. And Yardeni, by the way, which raised his recession odds again, second time in about a month, to 35%, largely on the back of geopolitics.
The problem is we've been waiting for a recession since March 22, which is when they started raising rates, and it hasn't happened. There's one other factor that's out there, guys, that I don't think is getting enough attention, but could be a reason that yields continue to move up. The Treasury likes to bury this report. It comes out on Friday of the deficit. So we got the final deficit number for this fiscal year, 1.7%, technically 24% higher than the year before, but actually trillion. That's an important T.
We wish it were 1.7%.
Yeah, 1.7% would be great.
1.7 trillion, 24% higher, but it's actually double if you sort of take out some of the quirks around the Biden student loan forgiveness number. The problem is that this is happening at a time of high growth, full unemployment. Those are times where you should be dealing with the deficit, not adding to the deficit and debt. And yes, government has to pay higher levels of interest, and that's a big part of the story here, but it's a problem. It's going to factor into this story about whether there's enough demand for all the supply. Interestingly, I learned at Canaccord Genuity note that, did you see that?
Tony Dwyer's note today.
That the S&P topped out July 31st when the announcement of issuance came out for Treasury on this quarter was significantly higher than last quarter's issuance. So that tells you that that's a factor here at play. Who's going to fund all this debt?
Our next guest says higher yields do reveal stronger growth, which is bad for bonds, not as bad, and perhaps even good for equities. Wharton School Professor of Finance Jeremy Siegel's with us on this Monday. Professor, it's great to have you. So does that mean you think earnings for the quarter are going to impress?
Sí, pero tarde o temprano, algún día llega el estado de cuenta de la tarjeta, mi estimado Akira, y toca pagar con más tasas de interés.
Professor, apologies, we'll get your audio working in a second here, come back to you. That is obviously one of the key hopes for the bulls, that the macro backdrop is going to reflect some strength in at least consensus earnings, if not for the quarter, maybe for 24. Professor, I think we got your audio back. Can you maybe start your answer again?
Yeah, right. Well, let's talk about, I mean, you listed some very good reasons why yields have risen.
No, es que ese es el
if
problema.
it's stronger
Es que
growth, what would you rather be in, stocks or bonds? I mean, clearly, stocks are the place to be in if we get stronger growth. And I don't mean just for last quarter. I think the promise of AI is real. This year, our growth is being driven by productivity. We actually have payrolls that are only half as big increase as we had last year, and we had less than 1% GDP growth. And this year we're going to have well over 2% GDP growth. So productivity-driven growth, I mean, first of all, it brings inflation down. It's good for earnings, but it does drive yields up. Higher real growth, more borrowing, more capital investment. I want to be in stocks and not bonds. Let's talk about the deficit. Suppose a higher yields are driven by the deficit, and that may mean higher inflation, in the future with big deficits. Where would you want to be? Stocks or bonds? You would want to be in stocks. Now, Sarah mentioned Japan. I'm not as convinced. Japan 30 years ago, when its stock market peaked off, was as big as the United States. Now it's a tiny fraction. Its economy and an aging population is declining. Yes, it holds a lot of treasuries, but I don't think Japan is the force that it once was. So I'm not as concerned about Japan as being a source of the reason. But when I take a look at these higher yields, especially driven by productivity, growth, and even if you worry about deficits, listen, I'd rather be in stocks.
Isn't the geopolitical picture, though, now, Professor, more short-term, more acute, more apt to give investors caution?
Right, it does, and these geopolitical problems are usually opportunities to buy if we look back at history. Now, clearly things could get worse in the Middle East before they get better. You are invited to try to time that in the market. Not many people can. What is the most famous saying in stocks? That stocks climb the wall of worry. And when then there's no clouds in the sky, you're buying too high. I really think geopolitical risk is in the long run an opportunity to buy stocks, not to sell stocks.
I think the point that I was trying to make, Professor, on Japan is that not necessarily that it's an economic headwind. However, it is a trigger for higher rates in the U.S. because we do see that when there's talk of their yield curve control adjustment, then our Treasury yields rise, which is all an economic headwind. So I get that you love stocks better than bonds, and we've had pleasantly surprising growth, but now we're facing the fastest tightening cycle that we've seen, this big backup in yields and what that does for financial conditions and for consumer spending and quantitative easing at the same time. That's the test for growth and for earnings ultimately, isn't it?
And you meant, I guess, quantitative tightening at the same time. Yeah, right, at the same time. Right. Certainly, I think these higher yields have been the source of this, 5-6% drop that we've seen in the S&P. But then when I think about, well, is that because of stronger growth? Then that means next quarter, that means next year, earnings are going to be better than they would be otherwise. Don't forget, we talk about stronger real yields, and certainly they have gone up. The 10-year TIPS is 2.5. We have to remember when TIPS came out in 1997, they were 3.5, and within 3 years they were 4.5. So in the long picture, these real yields, although certainly higher than they've been in the last 10, 12 years, are not high in terms of history. And if we have real growth that's the source of these higher yields, I don't think that's a negative for stocks.
Finally, S&P year-to-date total return is a nice 11% with dividends, but you strip out the Magnificent Seven, and you're almost 0.5%. Do you think that we need to continue to rely on mega cap tech, or can the rest of the economy join in?
Wow, it's been so unusual that the new bull market, if you call this a new bull market, but usually when you have a bear market, the new market is different leaders, and this is the same leaders as before. They have been magnificent, to say the least, but the difference between the big tech price earnings ratios and small and mid-cap price earnings ratios, which are 11 and 12, is one of the biggest that I've seen. So I'm not saying that the big cap are way overpriced or anything like that, but I say I've rarely seen mid and small as cheap as they are today.
Russell, with the new 52-week low this morning. Professor, we'll stay in touch. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Jeremy Siegel.
As we head to break, here's our roadmap for the rest of the hour. It's Mega Merger Monday with another deal in the oil patch. Chevron buying Hess for more than $50 billion. What it means for the sector and who could be next.
Plus, just speaking of the Magnificent Seven, it is a crucial week for the likes of Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta. All of them are gearing up to report earnings. And we're going to get you ready.
And while the healthcare spotlight has been focused on these weight loss drugs, biotech's been hitting some new lows. Are there some buying opportunities in there? We'll discuss that when Squawk on the Street continues in a moment.
Pues bueno, ya se facturaron las pérdidas, ya no se puede hacer más. Ok, sí, es que esta desplome del Standard & Poor's ha estado de muerte. La ruptura del 4.300 y del 4.500, 4.250 es tenebrosa.
Y entonces
y TLT, ¿no? Nuestros bonos del tesoro de TLT que definitivamente nos están perjudicando.
Pues que no, o sea, la verdad, Leo, seamos honestos con esta gráfica. No, nadie se la esperaba así tan fea. O sea, tiene que usted ser muy gurú.
Sí, no. Definitivamente. Ver los bonos del tesoro a este nivel en ese momento estaba muy difícil. Y es el producto de una guerra. O sea, realmente una guerra, de un ataque inesperado de Hamas, ¿no? Es como cuando pasó lo de Ucrania, ¿no? Cuando pasó lo de Ucrania, ¿quién se iba a esperar que el mercado reaccionara como reaccionó? Y fue cuando también cuando arrancó la guerra de Ucrania también nos agarró mal parqueados, ¿no? Pero sí, pero ahorita es el momento de entrar. Yo creo, cada vez estoy consolidando más en que si hay un rebote de este TLT, por lo menos hasta el 92, que se recupere, estaríamos, es que estamos más abajo que octubre del año pasado.
Estamos abajo desde el 2007, ¿no?
Sí, está mucho más abajo que octubre. Y toda esta recuperación de TLT fue el movimiento al alza del mercado accionario. Entonces, con que TLT reaccione por lo menos un poquito, con eso, sí. No me gusta haber tenido que bajar el call, la verdad. Pero bueno, tal vez, ¿sabe qué es lo que va a hacer tal vez acá en TLT? Tal vez en TLT lo que puedo hacer es cerrar los calls y dejar el put. Pero bueno, vamos a por ahora, si cierro el call, no, es que todavía estoy la venta de
need prices. This extends our visible growth profile into the 2030s. We've got leading shareholder distributions. Our dividend growth has been 6% per year over the last 5 years, double that of our nearest peer. We announced the intent to raise our dividend 8% in the first quarter of next year, increase our share buyback to $20 billion a year. We're returning cash to shareholders and still see relatively low multiples compared to the rest of the market. So we think there's a lot of upside.
Hess brings growth to Chevron, growth in resource, growth in production, growth in cash flow, and Chevron brings us financial strength in terms of a strong balance sheet, a diversified portfolio of assets, and industry-leading cash returns. So this strategic combination really builds and creates the premier oil and gas company positioned for the energy transition.
There it is, that energy transition. CEOs of Chevron and Hess, of course, speaking with us in the last hour about that $53 billion all-stock mega deal. Chevron's acquisition, of course, comes very recently after Exxon's deal to buy Pioneer. Let's discuss what all this latest M&A action in the oil industry means for the sector. Joining us here at Post 9 is Paul Sankey of Sankey Research, President, of course, lead analyst. Paul, nice to have you here. I guess both sides give it to me because I was asking Hess sort of why and why now to Chevron, especially given the price. But give me your take from the Chevron side and the Hess side as to whether you think it's a good deal.
Well, look, we know Guyana is the best asset in global oil. It's remarkable. So Hess was trading as a takeover play. And the question was, can you get a high enough premium for it actually to be a consummated deal? And as you said, the question then becomes for John Hess, why now and why at this price? Hess stock last week at an all-time high, so that's good. But just a 5% premium to that price, which is kind of bad. And this is by far the best remaining independent oil company out there on the U.S. exchange. So it is a little bit of a light price, and that does raise questions for the rest of the sector, I think, who don't have the asset base of Hess.
And for Chevron, just...
Yeah, it's just a great deal. I mean, Chevron's heavily exposed to Kazakhstan, which has to travel through Russia. That's a big part of the next 10 years. They're very, very good in the Permian, so if they buy in the Permian, they're going to dilute themselves. So really, it was a question of can Chevron get Hess? Frankly, I didn't think they could. I'm delighted for Chevron, and I think for John Hess, it's a tremendous end to his career as a CEO.
Why didn't you think Chevron could get them?
Because I didn't think they'd get it for 5% premium. I thought we were talking 200 a share. That's in range with the highest price targets on the street. So you're $20 below that, and that was the stretch target, let's say. The average street price target is 170, around where it went out, but of course that doesn't include a takeover premium. So.
Does it mean there's more consolidation in shale?
I think the knee-jerk would be as bad for Oxy. I think there was hope that Chevron would do Oxy amongst Oxy shareholders, maybe Mr. Buffett included, because of course Mr. Buffett owns both Chevron and Oxy stock. And then there's a second rank, if you want, to companies where what we're seeing here is the medium-rank companies are getting a poor multiple. And as you get bigger, you get a better multiple. So the bigger the better right now, and all the highest multiples are Exxon, Chevron. The next is Hess. The question is, how do these guys, in a synergistic way, in a good for all shareholders way, combine, let's say, someone like Devon and Marathon Oil, someone like Devon and Avintiv, someone like Avintiv and someone else. These guys really need to get bigger. And as you know, we had other rumors last week around Chesapeake and other names that you'd be doing similar deals to just scale up and get bigger and get
the two big guys are done for a while. They're going to be digesting large deals.
Absolutely, they have to be done. So that's why I say it's a little bit of a negative for Oxy.
Are the regulators going to let all this happen?
Got to go down to Guyana and ask them. But I think there isn't really a major issue with intra-Texas deals. There isn't a big issue here. I think if you just flip out Hess for Chevron, it doesn't really change the competitive landscape. I do think Exxon for Hess would have been much more of a challenge, because of course that would have worried the Guyanese probably. You would have had a lot more concentration to just the one big oil. And I think that the Guyanese, I assume they liked having John Hess around to sort of keep everyone honest. Mike Wirth is no less honest, so it all adds up. It's sort of a win-win, if we dare say it.
How about for the climate? I'm just curious, in terms of spending on carbon reduction efforts, they're not changing their targets at Chevron.
Google está pagando al
recent wave of consolidation saying anything in terms of the energy transition?
Friday, the great people of the Midwest basically had the Navigator CO2 pipeline cancelled. It's a big deal. It's a $6 billion CO2 pipeline that would have allowed ethanol to become sustainable aviation fuel. And, NIMBY opposition essentially had that pipeline cancelled. So it's going badly, and as you know, the other big theme at the moment in energy is just the solar stocks. They've been an absolute disaster, and if you list the reasons why, it's pretty brutal. I mean, the guidance of SolarEdge was horrific. And, that combines with obviously the Fed, with the interest rate environment, that you're seeing essentially these low return, long duration renewable stocks are getting absolutely crushed. And until we get, some kind of better interest rate environment with better returns, because the solar stocks are making poor returns essentially, it's very tough for everything in the environmental side of the market basically right now.
And then we were mentioning the UK and the Prime Minister's move on net zero. Politically, does it make less sense for policymakers absent NIMBY or absent price?
Yeah, look, I think the rubber's hitting the road here, and people are saying, like, is a Tesla really more environmentally friendly, when you look at the whole scale of things? And it goes right through everything, right? And of course, then you've got all the automaker problems to add to that. So there's a major backing off of the whole environmental investment. Let's just throw money at the problem and it'll help us sort things out. Basically because A, the returns support, and B, you can argue the environmental benefits are questionable. So it's a real problem for the sector, quite frankly, when you combine it with the Fed.
Environmental benefits being what? That you're running a Tesla off the grid, and if it's being...
Well, I mean, 75% of the Teslas in Europe are built in China. That's 75% oil-fired manufacturing, often in the case of the batteries, using forced labor. Polysilicon is forced labor. Do you really feel that that's environmentally friendly? If you just... And this was always the issue, and a Trump issue, right? Which is that you essentially offshored your manufacturing to a high coal, 75% coal. China's coal consumption is 50 million barrels a day of oil equivalent. Oil demand is 100 million barrels a day of oil equivalent. Anything coming out of China is arguably not environmentally friendly.
Although they have a large renewables as well. But, you know, Paul,
they're leading on renewables, actually.
Yeah. All right. You know, we're going to have you back, talk about some of these things as well. Conversation there, Paul. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Paul, thank you.
As Paul mentioned, Occidental getting hit. It's the only energy name that is doing worse right now than Chevron. Let's get to Pippa Stevens with a look at the sector and some of the names moving on the back of all this. Pippa.
Hey, Sarah. Well, there is so much buzz around that Chevron and Hess deal, although energy stocks are in the red today alongside the broader market. Now, looking at the technicals, it's now one of just 3 sectors trading above the 200-day moving average. The other 2 sectors being tech and communication services, according to BTIG. Now, that's on a market cap-weighted basis, but if we look at an equal weight basis, energy is actually the only group above its 200-day. Jonathan Krinsky from BTIG noting that energy's relative breakout means the sector is still attractive despite its outperformance over the last 3 months. Now, those gains have been led by upstream players as we see a pickup in deal activity, with the XOP up 10% in the last 3 months. On the flip side, refining stocks have taken a bit of a breather after making a series of new highs, and the crack ETF, which tracks the space, up just 3% in the last 3 months. David, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Pippa. As we head to break, check out the move in FMC. It's an agricultural science company. The company reduced third quarter revenue and earnings guidance on what it's calling destocking trends that were, quote, more severe than anticipated. 15% down. Don't go anywhere.
El reporte de utilidades de Microsoft me da, pues hay que darle muchísimo seguimiento.
Sí, más de que el de Amazon, el de Microsoft creo que es el que más debe importarnos, porque es el que puede darle la señal al mercado de que las megacaps
siguen vivas con el tema de inteligencia artificial, y que la inteligencia artificial sigue empujando al mercado.
Sí.
Ok, muchachos, pues bueno, pues por ahora dejemos acá su superpeso 18-19, ¿no?
Uy, se cayó. Sí.
18-20, a ver.
La última vez la había visto
25. A ver si cierra.
Fue
se desplomó. Ok, tenemos 9 días al vencimiento. Ok, muchachos, pues por ahora dejemos acá. Y mañana le seguimos, ¿no? Mañana seguimos.
Pues sí.
Muy bien.
Sí.
Pues bonito día y ánimo.
Buen día.
Hay que hacer retiros espirituales, sirve, limpia.
Sí. Bueno, pues.
Por lo menos tiene uno mejor ánimo.
Sí, eso sí. Tal vez yo no tuve tanto retiro espiritual el fin de semana. ¿Listo? Bueno, pues.